Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Cabral Concept. Great to have you here today. Excited to be able to go through a topic that I am extremely interested in, but know very little about. So with me here today is Jessica Green. And Jessica is actually a health coach on the Equilife health coaching team. Amazing health coach in her own right. She works with thousands of our Equilife-based private clients. You may have even had a lab coaching call with her. But in Jessica's, as I like to say, former life, she was a green building specialist. I'll let her give you her exact title and exactly what it is, because again, so much of this is new to me. I may have studied the toxins, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily know how do we build as toxic free and as energy saving as we can. So Jessica, I'm gonna let you take it from here. Thank you so much for being on the show here with me today. Something I just discovered about you just about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I said, you have to come on the show. So let us know a little bit about yourself and also what this former career was.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Cabral. So I'm a health coach, as you said now, and I made that transition a few years ago. Before then, I was in the world of green building, and there have been iterations. I started that career path in 2005. It's actually my second career path. And I spent a little over 10 years in that career path, moving from green building consulting to sustainability consulting, so a little bit more broad, and then into high performance building at a corporation. And it's been quite a journey, definitely a lot of learning experiences along the way. And, the reason why I shifted into the health related industry was because, like many of us health coaches, I ended up with some health issues, chronic health conditions. And I tried so many different things to help improve that. And it really wasn't until I made that shift to learn to become a health coach that I started to understand health at a deeper level and understood healing practices. In fact, reading your book, The Rain Barrel Effect, while I was becoming an IHP was just hitting everything. It's like, yes, this is exactly what I needed to see, what I needed to read. So that was a really wonderful book. I'm so glad that you wrote that.
Well, I'm glad that you are now on our Equilife team as well. We have such an amazing health coaching team. It really is. And it's also very diverse, which is why when we, at least you and I, are on those Monday and Thursday meetings, it's everybody's voice counts. It's like, okay, well, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? Like, and go back and forth. So it's a great group of people. But what I want to do today is not necessarily focus on health coaching, but focus more on the place that we spend probably the most time. Besides maybe an office building, we spend that time at least for 8 hours overnight trying to get a good night's sleep. And what I realized was that a lot of the issues that people have are from toxic homes. And it's not just mold, right? We always focus on mold. Okay, got to watch the mold. 52% of all homes in New England, in the United States, as well as the UK, have mold in them. And if you walk outside during the fall or spring in New England, you're breathing in mold. Like, that's very difficult to get against. But besides that, there's so many other topics to think about. And what I want to do is try to make this a little bit more approachable, so that if someone like me were to build a house in the future, or anyone out there, what would we be looking for? And also, if we're buying a home, what also should we look for? And so what I want to do is just, again, try to make this as easy for us as possible. But right before we get into all the topics that we should be thinking about and what's most important for each person is what exactly, so you did this for basically a decade. What did you help with these companies to do? Like, what was your expertise?
Well, that's a great question. I had a number of hats that I wore. And, a lot of times when working with companies in the green building world, they're interested primarily in anything that affects the bottom line. So energy and water savings kind of floats to the top. Other things like low VOC materials, which improve air quality, and mechanical systems that improve air quality. Those are somewhat important, maybe a little bit less important. I really focused in on materials for the longest time, not the entire duration of my career, but a lot of it was spent on materials and siting. And the materials would be anything from sourcing, like the sustainability of materials, carbon, sort of embodied carbon of materials, all the way to, do they off-gas, do they cause health problems for the occupants?
That's good. That's good to know.
Mm-hmm. And I also worked on policies, a variety of policies having to do with overall health impact of people in the building and around the building too. So pest management programs and housekeeping programs. So I dove into cleaning products and also, how do you maintain a pest-free building and a pest-free site without, spraying everything with toxins.
Yes. And that we have covered on previous shows. So we'll link up to that today. I just want to let people know when we go live with the episode, there's always a URL page. I'll send you to that. I don't have the exact number. This is slated to come out around episode 2008. So we'll certainly link up to that. But one thing for the pest management, because again, living in New England myself and having a place in Maine, there's ticks and there's mosquitoes everywhere. And so I've linked to different companies that I've used before using essential oils, and it does work. I mean, this is 3 years for us now using this, and it's fantastic. So I do have to say that. Now, before we start our conversation today, I kind of shared with you like, hey, this is all the different possibilities. You shared that with me. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because for me, what comes top of mind is I don't want my 2 daughters breathing in paint fumes, like for VOCs or insulation-based fumes. So that to me was super important. But why don't you go through the wide variety of items that a builder or company could look at, and then we'll start to take them one by one.
Okay. Yes. So why don't we just start with indoor air quality, since that's kind of a big one with regard to health, right? So indoor air quality can cover everything from how your house's ventilation system is set up, all the way to the paint that you put on the walls, right? So just in terms of ventilation is really important for a house, and not all houses have central air systems. But what's really important is that you have a way to move oxygen into the space. When CO2 levels get above, I want to say it's around 800 to 1,000 parts per million, you start to suffer. You start to feel fatigued. You start to get headaches. So it's really important to get that outside air into the building. So that's number one. And you could either do that by opening windows and getting a cross breeze. So if you have an existing house, that would be good. If it's a new build house, you want a whole house fan, at least one on each floor. That's usually located in the laundry room. For smaller houses, you can get away with a whole house fan kind of doubling up as your bathroom fan, but then it really needs to be going for a certain period of time every day. With HVAC systems, it's really important, if you can, have it set up so there's intake air from the outside to allow for fresh air to come in. So it kind of depends on what your housing situation is, how big your house is, if it's a new construction or an existing construction. Now, in terms of VOCs, the great thing is that there's been a lot of progress since the time that I started in the green building world in 2005. Back then, it was really hard to find zero VOC paints, but now you could get it at Home Depot. So it's not even an issue. But there are different things that you could do along the painting world and the finishes. So for paint, you could go with like a milk-based paint, a clay-based paint. Those are very low toxic paints. They don't have any petrochemicals to speak of. So that's an option as well. Either way, you're not going to get VOCs, but the material and the sourcing changes in terms of sort of the sustainability of it. So there's that piece. The other piece is that whenever you're looking at finishes for like kitchen cabinets and also for wood, like wood floors, look for water-based not oil-based. Anything that's oil-based is just going to off-gas for weeks and weeks, maybe even months. It's going to cause headaches. It's not a good smell, kind of like the new home smell is not a good smell. It shouldn't smell like anything. It should smell like just nothing, right? New car smell, same thing, right? We don't like new car smell. That's a bad idea. So those
funny
are
how people try to recreate the new car smell by putting in toxic like air filter things into their car to recreate that. But yeah, and that's why we're doing a show like this, is to get that education out there. Because what I heard you say for those three things for indoor air quality was make sure that the air is moving inside of the house. Because if the air is stagnant, yes, there's carbon dioxide buildup, but also that's when the humidity or dampness or mold can really start to accumulate as well. It also no VOC paint. So again, if I'm even looking back to when I built out my second location back in 2013, all I could get was low VOC. So I couldn't go no VOC, which was interesting. And then water-based finishers for the floor, like a polyurethane type is what you're talking about, right? But water-based.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be polyurethane. And that's something we're able to do. Those are three, again, great recommendations. And then what about a whole house filter? How would that work versus like the Air Doctor that we recommend, or the IQ Air?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you do have a forced air heating system, having a HEPA filter would be amazing, but a lot of household systems don't take HEPA filters. It's just too much energy to suck air through one of those suckers. So then you're looking at filters that are graded. And, I would say the minimum grading that you want on a filter is like an 8, going up to a MERV 13 filter. A MERV 13 is very nice. It's good to have that kind of a filter if you have allergies, for instance, because that'll take out pollen. But a HEPA filter, like on an Air Doctor, that's a little bit different. That takes it to the next level. It's really hard to get a household system that would be the equivalent of like an Air Doctor. So having an Air Doctor is really helpful, especially during right now. It's the fire season. I know there's a huge fire going on in Oregon right now, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest. And, we've had years in a row of fire. So having that kind of an Air Doctor is really beneficial. It saved us last year.
And that's why anybody that, they don't know how the house was built, you can still do a lot, meaning like you can get a water filter that we'll be talking about soon. You can do things for EMFs. You can also do things for your air quality. And the water that you drink and the air you breathe are pretty much the two most important in my book. Then we can move on to food and other items like that. So indoor air quality, do you want to add anything to that before we start to move to one of the other areas?
Indoor air quality. You mentioned mold before. And when I think about indoor air quality, plants, take plants, for instance. I know you've had that great podcast talking about plants that really help to filter out certain pollutants in the air. Different plants do different things. Plants are really excellent, but if you overwater them and they start to grow mold, they are not excellent. They're very bad. So just a word of advice around cleaning the air with plants. I see you have a lot of plants in your background. I've got a plant here and one on my shelf. Just making sure that you don't overwater them and checking them occasionally for mold. This is especially important around fertilizing. When you fertilize them, a lot of times they'll start to grow mold. So you've got to be careful about that.
So that is a great tip. And about 2 weeks before this show will go live, we actually have a Friday review talking about mold on household plants. So this is very timely. If people didn't listen to that, definitely listen to it. And something that you can do if you didn't check out that show is actually sprinkle cinnamon on the top layer of the soil to prevent mold from growing there. And then whenever the leaves die and they fall into the soil, get rid of them. Don't allow them to begin to accumulate or, turn moldy. I was a classic overwater. I thought the more water, like anything else, well, that's good. We got to hydrate them every day. Now I know I water my plants once a week. That's it. And they seem to be much happier that way as well.
Yep.
So good tips right there. Let's move on to the next topic. I mean, we've got a lot to go through. Some of them will be energy savings, money, meaning money saving as well. And some of them are just toxicity. And I think both are equally important, of course, because if we can save money at the same time, we can also be healthier. Then that's what we want to do. So what's the next topic that comes to mind?
Well, I think energy efficiency is a really important topic to address. And it can be a bit of a double-edged sword on that front. Now, I think if you're starting with new construction, it's more important to create a really energy efficient house to start with, something that doesn't need a lot of power for heating and cooling, for instance. Now, different climates, it doesn't always apply to certain climates. Like Hawaii, what I'm about to describe, something called Passivhaus was developed in Germany. Do you apply it to Hawaii? No, not really, because it's a sealed up building for the Passivhaus. But for Hawaii, everything is just wide open, right? You never seal anything up because it would grow mold. So Passivhaus is a great model to look at in terms of the energy efficiency of the windows, the insulation value of the walls, insulation value of the roof, insulation value of your slab or your basement. So basically, it's creating an environment that requires less energy to run on in the first place. You could also incorporate skylights or solar tubes to bring natural light into the space, so you could reduce the amount of artificial lighting that you have. So all of these strategies are really helpful. Also, getting energy efficient appliances are really important, but you can take it a step too far. I don't like smart homes. I don't like smart equipment. I don't like smart lighting. And the reason is because then you're just getting bombarded constantly with electromagnetic frequencies, which, as you and I know, are detrimental to your health. So I'd rather have a dumb home that's really well insulated rather than have a smart home. Now, there's some mistakes I think people make too with regard to existing homes. So for instance, say if you have a 1920s era home, something a little older that has lath and plaster. What some people will do is stuff the walls with insulation. Well, lath and plaster is meant to breathe. So when you stuff a home with insulation, not only will it just settle in the bottom and not really insulate very well, but it could cause some other issues with regard to how the air moves through the space. So in that, I think when you get into existing homes, it gets a little bit more complicated.
What about for a lot of people that are doing blown-in insulation and more of the hard foam core, where they spray that in? It actually acts as a almost structural basis for the roof and for the walls, and it makes everything really airtight. I mean, they do it a lot in New England, and it dramatically reduces, as long as you have pretty good windows, dramatically reduces your heating bills. And I would say air conditioning as well, keeps it in. But that has to be toxic, right? It has to be toxic fumes, or am I incorrect?
No, a lot of them, yeah. When you do a spray in, that's an actual foam that then hardens. Mm-hmm. Those tend to be pretty toxic. There are some not non-toxic, but less toxic options. Some soy-based blow-in or foam insulation can be helpful. In terms of other insulations, I believe that there's also mushroom-based insulation, but that's an exterior panel that you could put on your house. Say if you're doing a re-siding project and you want to add more insulation. Say if you have an existing house with 2x4 walls you're putting in, say, soy-based insulation in the middle of it. And then on the exterior, you decide, oh, I want a little bit more R value. R value is the insulation value. And on that, instead of picking like a more styrofoam-based product, you could pick more of like a mushroom-based product, some other type of product, more of a bio-based product. So that's a possibility. But then you would
before
put
the shingles go on? Okay, and then the siding goes on after that.
Yeah, the siding goes on. But for wet environments, it's highly recommended typically to have some sort of a rain screen on that. So then you have a bit of a gap between your insulation and then your actual siding, so that if moisture does get in, then it just sheets down. It just runs down through a gap. And then there's like a screen at the bottom so that insects don't crawl in and make a home there.
Got it. That makes sense. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So we talked about the energy savings there. And I know that you mentioned, creating a not so smart home, which would be, I think, again, for most people, maybe not as high tech as they would like, but what are some intermediaries? Like, what's a happy medium that we could do? Maybe not the entire host is like out of the movie Iron Man or something where everything's controlled by some artificial intelligence. But I know that a lot of people, including myself, they like to have a smart thermostat where they could turn it down when they're not home and turn it up before they do get home. But what would you consider, again, like a couple of these happy mediums?
Okay. Well, definitely you could get a smart thermostat that's wired instead of Wi-Fi. In terms of setting that up so it links to your phone, I kind of have a feeling that you'd need that Wi-Fi connection. But that's something that people could work out with their HVAC company to see if there's an option for that to still be wired, not a Wi-Fi, and to connect to your phone. Otherwise, then you're left with programming, right? Which you can absolutely do. You could say, oh, I want it to be in the away mode, like the one that I have, it has an away mode. If I want to set it for different seasons, I could set it for different seasons to heating and cooling. So that's one thing that you could do. You could definitely have smart thermostats without it being completely reliant on Wi-Fi devices.
Yeah, absolutely. And those could be put on airplane mode if needed. You can actually turn that off on your phone too, which is what I do. And so I think that is nice because that takes away. And then from there, it's like, okay, let's get into lighting, because a lot of people are using now smart lighting, as they call it. They can make it change colors. They can do it all with Alexa. They can do all the different things, which of course needs Bluetooth and it needs Wi-Fi. And all of these are matched up to all the individual lights because they're typically on their own little circuit or so. So tell us a little bit about energy saving lights and some of the downsides that I've seen for sure with a lot of these LED lights and Mercury and all that, but also in terms of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, et cetera.
Okay. So with regard to lighting, there are different components of lighting, right? There's the eye strain piece that, fluorescents, oh my gosh, yeah, fluorescents, they cause a lot of eye strain for people. You could actually, your eye is constantly adjusting to try to adjust to the light flickering, right? Yes. But with fluorescent lights, you could actually see the flicker. With LED lighting, your eyes are still trying to adjust to that flickering. So that can cause a sense of eye strain, maybe cause some headaches. But also the lighting tends to be pretty cool. And in terms of general lighting practices inside, I feel that we need to stick with the warmer lights. But then you think about the diurnal rhythm as well, sort of a natural diurnal rhythm. Besides optimizing the natural light from the outside, so creating opportunities for more natural lighting to get in, either through the solar tubes, which are just basically it's like a skylight, only it's in a tube form, literally. And it looks just like a can light. So you would never really notice the difference. But it provides natural lighting to come into your house from the outside.
Can you put in a solar tube if you've already built your house, or does that have to be from new construction?
No, you could do it for existing homes.
And that's not too big of a deal to put one in?
Nope.
I'm assuming it goes from roof down through whatever levels you would like, right?
Yes. Now, typically you would have it go just through one level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you're going to have to build some sort of a chase to house the tube.
So it wouldn't change anything structurally, right? You could, even if you ran it down another level, you could do it through the joists in the floor.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think, like, let's say you've got your bedrooms on the top level and you've got your living on the first level. You don't have a lot of lights in the house, too difficult for you to put in big skylights. Maybe it is easier to put in one of these solar tubes. It sounds pretty amazing as well. I've never heard of them before.
Yes. And I would really recommend those to be more an interior space. So not a bedroom, because you want to be able to have the lights low in the summertime. The sun doesn't set for a really long time. So not the bedrooms, but I would recommend them either you could do bathrooms, especially interior bathrooms are really nice. Hallways, it's a great option for hallways. If you have a portion of your house which just happens to be kind of dark in general during the day, that's a good spot for them.
That makes sense. That's a great tip right there. Now, we were just talking about the lighting parts of it. I just want to make sure that audience knows that cooler is going to be more of your bright white lights, like sterile white, blue light, bluish tone. And then your warmer is going to be more of that. It's not quite red orange, but it's more towards the reddish orange. I use them just for lighting for podcasts and all that. And I believe it's by lumens, right? Is that correct? Or is it lux? Because it goes like cool is going to be anything below like 4,200. And then it starts to get cool above that. It becomes much more bright white. And you can actually see these by going into a lighting store. They'll typically have, this one's 3,000, this one's 3,500, this is 3,700. And you can actually see the color that you might like.
Yes, exactly. Now, when it comes to diurnal rhythms, it's nice to have the lighting be more of an orange or even a red color at night. Mm-hmm. And so to do that in a very low techy kind of way, an option can be to get actual like orange or red light bulbs and select specific lamps in your house to have those come on in the evening. So you turn off the can lighting, you turn that off, and then you turn on some of these red lights. So it's a dimmer light, and then you have more of that red glow, and that will help with helping your body ease into the evening time and ready for bed.
I think they're amazing. I mean, I use those myself. I've talked about them on the show before. So we'll link up the podcast about the natural pest spray, the plants, and then also these amber lights, because we put one in our living room and we put one in our bedroom. And not only, I think it just looks amazing, like this cool orange light, but it's almost like a salt lamp, but not as bright. It's more of that true amber color. And then it's basically a signaling of your mind as well. Like, it's evening time. It's a time to relax. Now we relax. And once these lights go on. So I think it's great. I really do. And this is something I can't recommend enough, because literally all you do is take your existing lamps and pop one of those in there. And probably for most whatever type of lights you have, you can absolutely get one. You can even get the really high-end looking ones, like the Edison light bulbs. They do some more amber-based ones. Yes, they do. In fact, you could get the Edison light bulbs to look like real Edison bulbs, but they're really LEDs. I love that. I love that design has come such a long way, where you could get a really nice aesthetic with it still being energy efficient and still being the gradation of color that you want. Let's talk a little bit about these LED lights, because these are the ones that basically last 10 years. They essentially last forever. You can put them in your home, and you can get the different colors that you want, the different hues that you want. But it's, to my knowledge, these can be very dangerous if broken. Have you read up on that? Do you know anything about the higher levels of mercury in them? LEDs, I think you're thinking about the fluorescent bulbs. The fluorescent bulbs have mercury. The LEDs don't have mercury. I thought the new LED bulbs that were slower to come on, but then they stay bright and you can keep them on basically forever, they had mercury inside. I'm going to look that up. That may not actually be true. So I'm going to put that on today's show notes. That would be new to me. All right. So we're going to look that one up, and I'll mark it down here on the show. So anything else that you want to go over on lighting? We went through a lot of what you can add to either existing homes or build for new, but anything else we should be thinking about?
In terms of energy in general, not just energy efficiency, but the way that we're exposed to energy, just thinking about, where your sockets are, where your light sockets are in relationship to your bed, where your bed is in relationship to the walls will matter in terms of the amount of EMFs that you get at night. And since you sleep in your bed for such a long time, that kind of exposure is really important to consider. So keeping your bed away from the walls or having it only near one wall is better than having it in a corner, because you'll get more radiation from that. The other thing is that you can get panels that attach to, they're like a special panel that you add on to your existing electric panel, and that can cut down on dirty electricity. So that's something that you could do for an existing house, or you could plan for that for a new house.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Is that when you essentially kill the power to the bedrooms at night at a specific time?
No, that you're thinking of a master switch. A master switch is really nice. You could put that in any room, or you can literally turn off the bedroom, all the electricity to the bedroom from your electrical panel, because every room is on its own circuit. Yeah. So that's
I mean, I love that idea, because the problem is if you move into a house and you weren't the one that designed this house. Now, if you're designing it, just think about where is the bed going to go in that bedroom for yourself, your guests, your kids, because I didn't know this ahead of time. And behind my bed are literally two outlets, which is great if you want lamps beside your bed, right? Because then you have your partner and you can have your own little lamp there. The problem is that your head is literally against the outlet. And then once you realize, oh, I shouldn't plug in the thing because then I even get more EMFs and radiation, you unplug it. Well, there's still that dirty electricity that your head is literally right against. So now knowing that there's patches, there are things that you can put over it so that you don't get as much of the EMFs. But if you were designing ahead of time, know where your bed's going to go, put the outlets against the walls, not against behind your bed. I had to do the same for my daughters. I had to move my daughter's bed away from the wall because when they're sleeping there and kids are going to be more greatly affected by it. I tested it with my EMF reader and the radiation, and EMFs were quite high.
Yes, they get very high with that.
Let's go back to what you were talking about. So it's not the master switch, which literally, by the way, another one is really great idea. You don't have to go down to your circuit breaker. Like ours is in the basement or in the garage. So you can actually do it for the bedroom. So you click your switch and it literally kills then all the power to all of the outlets. So if you go into your bedroom, well, it doesn't really matter anymore now that the outlets are behind your head because all the power is now shut off to those.
Yes.
How difficult, by the way, is that to put in? Like for me to go do that at my house, is that a big deal for an electrician to do?
No, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a big deal for the electrician to do. I'm
gonna have to look into that. Maybe
I'm just trying to think about the details of that, because usually there's one circuit that goes along, one circuit that goes to the light switch for the lighting. And then there's another circuit that goes around the room for all the sockets. So the electrician should be able to sort out where the wires go to. Typically, they'll go to sort of the same area. If you live in an older house where wiring has been done over time, well, then you have a bigger issue. You probably want an electrician to double check all the wiring in the house and maybe even redo it if your house is old enough, in which case they're going to be able to just, put in a new master switch pretty easily.
And for all the people who charge their phone and keep it right beside the bed, you're saying, well, I won't be able to charge my phone. Better not to do that anyway. Get it out of your room. You can always have a battery powered alarm clock so that you don't have any of those EMFs. And I think that's probably a better idea.
Yeah, that is a much better idea. Now, I did want to touch on solar panels, because a lot of people are interested in putting solar panels on the roof lately, and which are great. I love solar panels, but there is always a space where the inverter goes. So solar panels, they create DC power, and then they have to be converted to AC power in order to be able to flow into your house, right? Unless you're living off grid, in which case everything is going to be DC. So for this, the inverter can give off a lot of EMFs, a lot of electromagnetic frequencies. And so when you think about putting solar power in your house, you want to designate a space that you can actually shield it. And so it might be that you want to shield the room, or you could create like a shielding cage around it. So that's just something to think about, because you don't need that extra influx of EMFs from the inverter.
I had a question on that. So let's say like Tesla's coming out with their new shingles that actually look like shingles, but they're all solar panels. They're not for everyday use yet, because solar panels on top of your roof, honestly, I don't have that big of a deal with it, but it takes away from the overall not appeal, I would say, but aesthetic of the house if you're trying to go for a specific roof look or whatever it might be. However, again, now they're creating shingle roofs basically that look like slate that are actually solar panels, which are pretty remarkable. However, I always wondered, what if your bedroom is below the roof? Are you actually has that been tested yet for EMFs? So like, are you sleeping under a blanket of EMFs, or is it all being collected and then run into this converter or inverter that you're talking about?
You know, that is such a good question. Yes, DC power would be giving off some sort of EMFs. And for any bedroom, just in general, I would suggest shielding the whole thing.
So putting a Faraday blanket, or like, what would you use between the solar panels and like your roof? Like what do you typically recommend?
What I would do is I would use shielding paint.
Okay.
For not just the ceiling, I would use it for the room. And then I would have a shielding silver infused curtains. And then you got to make sure to paint the doors as well. So it should be completely shielded. But once it is shielded, you don't want to bring your cell phone in there. You don't want to have a laptop looking for Wi-Fi or anything like that, because that just bounces around and it makes, it worse. It sort of defeats the purpose. But I would be tempted to just shield the room. In fact, we're going to be working on our house renovation project. When I moved in, I project managed the gutting of the house and sort of rebuilding the inside. But now we're going to go up. And when we go up, we're going to have the bedrooms upstairs. All the rooms are going to be shielded.
That's great. So inside of the paint, are there, is it copper? Is it silver? What's actually in the paint that would block the EMFs?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm trying
I know
to
typically
remember.
there's copper lining in a lot of the Faraday blankets. I'm wondering if they do microparticles the same.
There can be silver in that paint. It could be some sort of a metal. The paint that I'm planning on using is got carbon in it. So it's black. It's a pitch black paint. So it's going to be really hard to cover it up afterwards. It's going to be like several layers of paint going over it. And I'm not going to be able to use like milk-based paint or clay-based paint on that. So it has a carbon, but then you have these strips. They're kind of like metal tapes. And the metal tapes have to go across each of the wall and ceiling surfaces, and I guess also the floor surface too. And then it connects to an outlet, and that's how it grounds.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay. So basically all of the frequencies are running down these wired tapes that then go to a grounded outlet. Yeah, that makes sense, because it has to get out somehow, right? It can't dissipate. So the energy has to get back to the earth. Yep.
Yes, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. What else on solar panels? Because I'm a big believer. I would love to be able to one day have not off grid, but more independent house that wasn't so reliant on outside sources, and not because I believe in like any conspiracy that they're going to take away our power or anything like that, but simply because it's always nice to be as self-sufficient as possible and also create as little waste as possible. So if I can use the sun, even here in New England, I can get some sun, then I could use that, store it. And then if there's extra, well, then you can get it back to potentially other people who need it, or even sell it back to the city. So what are some other things that we should be thinking about when using solar or wind or anything else for the house?
Oh, that's a really good question. So when you're using solar, the location of it, of course, is really important. Usually we put it on the the south side of the roof. But more importantly, we've got to make sure that there's no trees blocking the light. Mm-hmm. Now, here where I live, we don't have really tall trees on our property, but there's tall trees on the neighboring property. Those tall trees don't put any shade on the roof during the summertime, but they do in the wintertime. Mm. So when you're looking at your roof, you need to check for those shaded areas. Are you going to be able to produce solar power energy during the winter months? And if so, how much? And that will kind of dictate your storage capacities and also whether or not you're going to be able to put anything back to the grid. Now, typically, if you have a storage unit, you're not going to be sending overflow back into the grid. Typically, it depends also, are you still grid connected? I would assume like in Maine, you would still be connected to the grid because wintertime it's going to get, cold. You're going to use up energy. There's also not going to be as much daylight to harvest. So for Maine, it might be mostly during the summertime that you're able to use the energy that you collect from the solar panel. The other thing is that depending on the area that you're in, if you're trying to get financial assistance or getting incentivized by like the power company, they're going to expect to have that connected to the grid so that when you do produce the energy, it will flow into the grid as well as your house. So overflow would go into the grid, and that's how you get incentivized. If you're doing sort of a standalone off-grid structure, Maine might be a little bit harder to do, a little bit more of a challenge. In that case, you would not have it connected to the grid, and then you don't get incentives. It would be its own standalone thing.
What about, I don't see a lot of people doing it, and I'm wondering why. Maybe it's an expense. But what about using a small wind turbine on the side of the house? I mean, not one of the big freestanding ones that we see, kind of self-standing that are enormous, but a smaller one do they just not produce enough energy, even though, every time it spins, it's kind of building up energy?
Yeah. The energy that it produces is pretty small. I remember a project in Portland a while ago. I think I want to say it was at the university there, Portland State maybe. And they were testing out these little wind turbines. They were actually vertical. And they were actually pretty large, maybe 3-4 feet tall, like this big around. Mm-hmm. And all they really did was light the light fixture that it was attached to. Mm. Yeah. And then it kind of depends on siting as well. So if you're in a city, having wind power can be really interesting. You could take advantage, like if you're in Chicago or something, you take advantage of the updrafts up the side of the building and wind going around the building. So then you could attach these kind of pieces. In fact, I remember seeing examples of those where they're kind of the same idea of the wind turbine that's long and sort of cylindrical. Mm-hmm. They're much bigger. They go on top of the building. Yeah, they do produce some energy, but it's not going to be enough. In that environment, it's not going to power the whole building by any means. It's going to maybe make 1% of the building's power, maybe 2% of the building's power. So it's, kind of a big expense and more of a kind of an interesting thing, like a statement piece for that. So that's probably why you don't see very much of that. There are other technologies out there. I know in the Tri-Cities area, there has been some work in the development, and I don't know how far this has gone, but instead of solar panels, it's like a big, like a dish, and it's got a little motor in the middle. The sun gets collected, heats things up, it makes the motor go, and then it produces energy that way. Mm. So that is more appropriate for big kind of industrial scale energy power plant type of things. That's a really interesting way to have power, but I haven't seen it applied to a house. I don't think it's a technology that really works very well for a house.
Yeah, because one thing that I do look for is, again, we kind of split our time between Boston and Maine. When you're in Maine, they're much better about it now, but there's some big storms. And so typically people have propane to keep things going. They have a generator. But once that runs out, you can't make more. And so you hope that during that blizzard or snowstorm or whatever, that everything's back up and running, and that of course, you need to make sure your refrigerator stays closed, your freezer stays closed. So it's like, okay, well, how else could you produce energy? And it's funny that we still struggle to a degree with all of nature around us to actually harness that to make our own energy. It's pretty wild. I always find it very strange. Obviously not my forte, but I'm like, we can't use the sun, the wind, the rain, the, geomagnetic or thermal based energy to create energy. So it's strange to me.
Yeah, for a house especially, I think it's hard to take advantage of some of these other sources just because of the cost implications. Depending on where you're at, though, taking advantage of the geothermal energy could be a possibility, right? There's different ways to do it. One of the ways is to have to tunnel down, drill really, really deep, and you could make it like a closed loop system or an open loop system where maybe you're taking groundwater up to the surface in order to cool the building. You could also make it more temperate during the winter months, right? Because the earth is at more of a constant temperature. If you don't have the ability to go straight down for whatever reason, you can also do, so this would be more appropriate for new build construction. You can actually have like this series of trenches just going underneath your house. They'd be still pretty deep, at least 5 feet or more. It's trying to get to that sort of more constant state temperature. And you can take that for heating or cooling, and that could be a closed loop system. So in that case, it might go to, say, a radiant floor system, something like that. But you wouldn't, it wouldn't heat your house completely during the winter. It would just be more of a consistent. So instead of 0 degrees, it would bring in warmth that would maybe preheat a system.
Yes. How do you feel about radiant floors? Do you think they should be water heated? Are you good with electric coils? What do you think about that?
I think water is better. In fact, in the house that my husband and I first bought together in Portland, we renovated it. It was a 1920s era house. And the floor, we had 2 types of floor, but we put in our own radiant floor heating system. There's different ways to do it. This case, we had a basement. So for what we did on the main floor of the house, which was pretty small, it was a small house, we had it's just a water heater. Now you could use a boiler if you have a bigger house, but you would have a water heater, and then you would have that linked to a thermostat, and then you'd run PEX pipe through just underneath the board, and they call it staple up. So what you get are like these metal aluminum panels where you literally staple up and you have the pipe going through them. So that's what we did for the floor heating. And that was really lovely. The pets really loved it. They would just lounge on the floor. The heat would go on. It heats really efficiently. It heats more efficiently than forced air does, because forced air doesn't warm up the surfaces. When you have radiant heating, you're not only heating up the surface of the floor, but you can also heat up the walls. It does not work if you have carpet, though. The other great way to do this is what we did for the basement, in which case we had a grid. So it's like a metal grate. And then we tied the PEX pipe to that grid. And then we poured another layer of concrete on it. So just a thin layer of concrete. And that was really amazing. You have to insulate that, though, underneath. So you can't just put it on the slab, or else the ground will get your heat instead of the room. So you insulate that, put the pipes on, pour the concrete, and then you get this really nice radiant heat throughout that floor.
And the PEX pipe is really just, we're talking about flexible water tube piping, right?
Yes, exactly.
That you can run. Okay. So
yes.
Just one thing on that, since we're talking about floors, that was a really good tip too with the basement, because a lot of people say, okay, I want to build out another 300 square feet in my house. And you can take a basement 10 feet by 30 feet and you can have, okay, now I've got another 300 feet. It could be a teenager's bedroom, a play space, a study, whatever you want to do. And a lot of people are doing that now because they might want to upgrade their homes, but home prices are unbelievably crazy right now. So they're saying, hey, why don't I renovate? And it's probably a good idea. So when you're renovating and you're doing that basement, you want to just make sure you want to watch for water seepage and humidity and mold as well, right? Because mold loves to live in dark, damp places. So give us a couple basement tips.
Okay, basement tips. So best thing is to keep water from flowing to your house in the first place. So I would start with the exterior of the house. If you have an existing basement, to dig outside around the basement and put water barriers on the exterior and then a drainage system. You could either put the drainage system right up against the wall, and there's drainage systems that are very specific to that situation. Mm-hmm. So you put that on the hilly side. Say if you have a basement that's kind of lit, it's on a hill, you would just put it on the part that goes in the ground, right? So that's a piece of the puzzle. So keeping the water away from the foundation to start with. And then on the inside, presumably in that circumstance, you wouldn't need to put an extra water barrier on the inside. Now, if you don't have that opportunity to dig all the way down for whatever reason, then what you can do is just make sure that any rainwater falling near your house is shedding away from your house. And then you could put a French drain farther out, so a few feet away. So you have a little bit of a slope, French drain, and then it goes around your house to make sure that water doesn't really collect and puddle. And then on the inside, you would paint a water barrier, put a water barrier on that, and then you would build a wall within that. So you do like 2x4 construction, you could still have insulation on the inside, but you need an air gap as well.
One thing that because basements, you just have to be careful. And that was, really, really great tips right there. And a French drain, for anybody that doesn't speak French drain, is basically like a bunch of rocks making a nice little barrier that then allows the water to flow away from the house instead of soil. So, and it's very impressive because again, like things are a little backwards sometimes when we're in Maine, and sometimes there's septic issues and sewage issues and all that. And people have French drains leading away from their property that come in very handy. So that's how I've gotten to know them. But in terms of your basement, this is actually really important because a lot of people will say, okay, I'm going to go in the basement. I've got my foundation wall and I'm going to put up sheetrock, right against it or whatever it might be, maybe an inch or so away after they build a frame. Problem is, if the water seeps in and it touches the insulation or the back of your sheetrock, you're going to get mold and you're not going to see it. And so would you recommend not putting up sheetrock, like just making nice concrete walls and paint the walls so you actually see if there's water coming in? It's just kind of what I'm just thinking it through right now. It's what I would do because it's like, how do you totally keep water out of a subterranean, basement?
Yeah. So if you can't do the exterior treatment that I'm talking about, and if you can't do the exterior treatment that I'm talking about, and you're concerned about water seepage, you could do a couple things, I guess. I mean, you could leave it completely raw and open, but then have a dehumidifier in the basement. So that would be like the lowest hanging fruit. That would be like a cheap solution. But you'd have to make sure that dehumidifier is attached to something that it goes into a drain so that it leaves the space, right?
Yes.
So that's one option. The other option, like I said, is to coat and seal the concrete. It doesn't look pretty though. So, I'm not sure about trying to make that a finish because it could be a funny color that you don't like. It could be black. It could be orange, And
can you paint over it though?
That's a good question. I'd have to look into that to see what the possibilities are for painting over it. I feel like with that finish, it is a sealant. So getting a paint to stick to something that's slick like that, I suppose it's possible that you could prime it and then paint something on top of it. I just worry about the paint peeling off. Right.
What about, and that makes sense. What about doing, instead of drywall, a like stone surface, like the 1/4 inch brick or 1/4 inch stone?
Oh,
to make it look
that's
a little
really
nicer.
interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Just thinking of possibilities.
So in that circumstance, so in that case, you could do it two ways. So you could either let the whole place breathe. And so say if you have stone finishes, you'll have the mortar, right? And the mortar should be breathable. It'll still stick the stone to it, but it's going to be breathable. And then the grout, of course, is breathable. And then you wouldn't really seal it. You wouldn't seal it because then you want it to breathe, right? Same with a basement floor. So with a basement floor, if you think about actually basement floors, this is really interesting. If you don't have, like you have a really old house and it's got like dirt floors still, you could take advantage of that. What you could do is you'd put a barrier. The barrier could be, it could be something that is just more for the structure, for keeping the floor from wobbling. And then you could put a layer of sand on that. And then you could put a layer of stone on that and just have it dry set. So this would be more in keeping with like old cottages from like several hundred years ago, maybe in England. You know, I've seen this on historic building projects where they leave that. Again, they're leaving it very open and flowing, but you still need a dehumidifier for the space just in case, because you also don't want other things in there to mold, like fabrics and wooden furniture.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just trying to give people that have an old basement a way to be able to do this. And the reason is that if you get water damage, you need to rip out your floors, your carpets, your walls, everything. So you need to make sure that you are doing some type of water treatment, ideally on the exterior, if needed on the interior, before really finishing it out, because it becomes a real dangerous situation, not just money wise to have to redo it. Because most people won't want to spend the money to redo all of this. And then insurance company might be like, oh, well, we'll pay just for the floors, but not for the walls, because the walls look fine, but they don't see what's behind the walls. So that can especially if that's someone's sleeping area, very damaging to breathe in all those mold spores. So those were all good tips, really good tips. While we're talking about floors, what are some of the best hardwoods or carpets or other types of treatments that we can use inside the house?
Okay. So for flooring, there's different things to look at. In general, I stay away from wall-to-wall carpeting because of allergies, pet dander, chemicals that come in on the bottom of shoes, all of that. I don't really think of rugs as very healthy. But if you were going to go with a carpet, I would tend to go with a pure wool carpet and without any treatment, because wool doesn't need treatment. It's already hydrophobic. So even if you spilt like a black ink cartridge on white wool carpet, like I did once upon a time, you could still take it up. You could take it up because it just sits on the surface. So that's really great in terms of durability as well. Wool carpets, a good grade wool carpet will do that for you. Definitely no treatment. Never get a treatment on a carpet. That's just not healthy. You don't want Scotchgard into your, pet's paws, into your baby's skin, nothing like that. So that's an option. Another option, and this is what I tend to go for, is a hardwood. Now, sourcing of hardwood materials, there's different options. First off, don't get the fake hardwood. That's really vinyl planks. I know a lot of home shows will say, oh, this is so durable. It's perfect for kids, perfect for pets. But that vinyl is off-gassing. It's off-gassing for years in your house. And that's a bad thing.
I was going to ask you how long, meaning like, because a lot of these things, you get insulation, you get the VOC paints, you get the polyurethane. So you're saying years it off gases. Yeah,
you might not smell it for years, but the vinyl windows will off gas. The vinyl flooring will off gas. I would avoid it. Now, if you do have a circumstance where you really want some sort of flooring that is inexpensive, like a vinyl, you could get linoleum. Linoleum is completely inert. It lasts for a really long time, so long as you understand the difference in how to take care of that versus, a vinyl flooring. They're two different things. So that's a good option. And you could get those in rolls or in tiles. So you have some design ability in that.
It's
So
funny
that
that you
could
mentioned
be,
linoleum, because linoleum was like from the 1970s, right? It's like a throwback. Everybody's putting linoleum all over the house. It was easy. You'd roll it right in there. But I'm sure you, just like anything, you've got some pretty fantastic choices now, 40 years later, 50 years later.
oh yeah, it goes back even further though than that. There's, and you talk about the 70s, our ferry boat system still has the original linoleum in most of it, right?
And you just glue that down, right? So you have to use what, a water-based glue?
Yeah, in this case, it would be a water-based glue that you would use for taking that down. So that's really good for wet surfaces. Tile, of course, is really great. You could use natural stone tile, but for kitchens or bathrooms, you always want to seal it. Otherwise it stains, and seal it with a water-based zero VOC sealant. And then in terms of wood, it's really important to look at, different pieces of it. For instance, I would not go to like some cheap warehouse and get engineered wood flooring, because who knows what the glue includes, right? Formaldehyde is a thing. Urea formaldehyde glues are really cheap. Not the best thing for breathing in. So when you look for hard flooring, look for like a Floor Score certified. So there's some certifications out there. Floor Score certified is really nice. Also, you might look at sourcing as well. So you could do engineered or completely hardwood flooring, which is a solid wood flooring that you would normally like nail in. That has a different application than, say, an engineered floating floor, which you can, like I said, float it, or you can glue it down. But that's a kind of tongue and groove. The other kind is also kind of tongue and groove, but it's a nail down. So depending on what your substrate is, it might dictate whether or not you do one type of floor versus another. When you're looking at flooring that's wood, choosing an FSC certified wood flooring is a great idea. If you are concerned about the environmental impact of how that wood was grown, how the forest was managed, how it was harvested, FSC certification is a really good certification, and it's third-party verified as well.
That's great. So I want to get to the last part I want to talk about here today. One more question is the different types, because you were explaining before, which was new to me, sustainable versus regenerative, et cetera. So I want to go through that in just a moment, but there's one more part that we want to get to. Is there anything about the overall roofing that we can look at in terms of green building? Because typically people are putting either metal roofs on or asphalt roofs on, or I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Any harm necessarily in either one of those?
Well, there's a couple of ways to look at it. If you were doing rainwater collection systems, for instance, I wouldn't use an asphalt type roof. It would collect materials. Some of the little rock particles go into the water. Also, it's tar. So that goes into the water. I would tend to lean towards a metal seam roof. Metal seam roofs are a lot more durable, could last 50 years. Those are fantastic. If you have a historic home, going along with slate is perfectly fine as an option. It's also fine for rainwater collection. You could do that with slate. You could do that with a terracotta roof. So there are different materials. I tend to lean away from the kind of, cheaper, not long-lasting roofs. Right.
It'll cost you less up front, but the same or more in the long run from having to do repairs or replacing it in half the time, that it would for something like a metal roof or a slate roof, something like that.
Yes, exactly. And if you have a flat roof, then staying away from the tar roofing materials, because that's, it's stinky, it's disgusting, really. And going with a membrane style roof is much better.
Excellent. Well, a lot of great tips already today. What I would love to be able to do is, one, in just a moment, give people a place to where they can learn more, find out more about all of these different tips for renovating their current home or building new as well. But before we get to that, let us know a little bit more about green building in general. There are basically, I think you said 3 or 4 different levels to look at, with the last level being what we should all be striving for.
Yes. Okay. And some of the things that I'll talk about can be resources as well for people to go to. So for instance, Energy Star Home, just looking at the very bare minimum, just a basic energy efficient home. We're not talking about anything really expensive here. It's mostly, do you have good insulated windows? Do you have energy efficient equipment and appliances and lighting systems in your house? So very simple, right? That's sort of like, hey, it's better than the bare minimum that we're legally required to do in a house, right? So
and
that's
doesn't
like
designate toxicity, just energy savings.
Just energy savings, right?
Okay.
So Energy Star. So you could go to Energy Star to their website to find some more resources around that.
Yes.
Then there are also, let's say Energy Star, just like Energy Star, there's also a water saving sort of standard as well that you could look at. But that's going to be along the same lines. So it's going to be water efficient appliances, water efficient toilets, and then looking at things like drip irrigation systems. So those are pretty basic too. So you've got energy savings and water savings. And again, people will gravitate to this, rightly so, because it's, a lower hanging fruit. It's easier to do in an existing house. And it's something that people could see a benefit from, right? Because then they get the energy and water savings. So that's really wonderful. That next level up, I would say, would be some municipalities will actually have a green building for homes program. And, I know Portland, I believe still has theirs. There's a green home building program. Larger municipalities will have this, and that'll cover some of the basics as well. Energy and water savings, of course, but then they'll also look at some of the materials inside the home, which is really nice because then you start to get into the low VOCs, a little bit more in the air quality. A step up from that might be LEED for Homes certification, which is a third-party certification system. That's a little bit easier for new construction, but you could also apply it to renovations. So if you're renovating your home, using the LEED certification standard is a nice thing to try. That would cover everything from site, so like planting selections, irrigation systems, drainage. Do you have your car attached or not attached to the house, because that affects the air quality in the home? It looks at ventilation in the home. It looks at VOCs, basics for materials. You could even do like sourcing of materials. So there could be some things like FSC certification that I just mentioned, for instance. And then, so that's kind of like a sort of a green home level. I would consider that a perfectly reasonable, green home standard. It's good. It covers a lot of things. Beyond that, you have sort of this, what is sustainable? And I was chatting a little bit with you before we started. There's sort of like sustainable is really not doing bad, but not necessarily doing good, right? Green home certification, I would say, is kind of a little bit below, right? Better than the worst case scenario. And then you go beyond that, and there is something called the Living Building Challenge, which is really interesting because not only does it have a prescriptive piece to it in terms of, how far you could go to get your materials for the project, it also has some standards around performance. So it requires zero net energy, zero net water, both in and out, which is really interesting. This includes sewage waste. So you're actually being measured for an entire year to ensure that, okay, you've met all the requirements. But that program also has this more regenerative piece as well, which that's why it's above the sustainable line. It's that it might be repairing some of the site. So the site topography, maybe the water systems that go through the site. Where does your house sit in the whole scheme of the surrounding area? Is there a piece that could be repaired? And then also just looking at the sourcing for materials. It goes so far as, I believe, there's still the requirement where vinyl is not allowed in there because it's one of the red listed items. But wiring tends to be coated in vinyl. So then you have this extra step to take. It's like, okay, how do I get the vinyl out of my house? How do I get it out of the sealants that go around my window? How do I get it out of, the wiring? How do I get it out of the wiring from the mechanical systems? All of that gets taken into account. So it's a really amazing system. But of course, you could imagine that the price tag starts to go up in houses like that, because there's a lot more to do.
There is, and it seems like there's always one more step you can take. One more step you take. We didn't even talk about the landscaping, the exterior landscaping in the house. So we'll have to make that a part 2 for the future. But where can people hire a consultant for green building, or do they already have to have an architect designer who does that?
That's a really good question. I would say the first step, hiring an architect or a designer that is already well-versed in sustainability. Mm-hmm. And then just checking out their portfolio. Do they have the aesthetic that you like? Do they have the green building knowledge that you like? Ask plenty of questions. That's a good first place to start. A next step beyond that would be to hire a green building consultant. So you could go with, the companies that I worked for, Brightworks, Green Building Services, those don't focus as much on housing, like single family homes, but there are definitely companies that do focus on those. You could also, if you're interested in a specific certification, going to Energy Star, going to your local green building program manager, because, a lot of cities have that. They will be able to point you to someone who can help you go through that certification process, whatever that is. Lead for Homes, you could contact Lead for Homes online to find someone who is a designated certification agent for that body. So they could help guide you in that process. Usually they're pretty hands-on. They're actually physically in that location, which is nice. For moving beyond that, you could look at something like Living Future Institute, which they definitely have resources, and you could look at some of their guidelines. They have outlines of their guidelines available for free. Same with Lead. Lead for Homes has outlines of their guidelines that you could look for free without having to purchase the full reference guide.
That's great. I mean, this has really been, especially for anybody who's interested in saying, all right, I'm eating healthy. I've got my water filters. I'm using natural-based bug sprays, all these different things. Okay, what else can I be doing? And this is really that next level, but it's not something that it's minor, that has like no significance. It's actually you're living in a home that is breathing and you're breathing in what it's giving off. And so it really does make a difference. Again, we can only control what we can control. That is why we have our air filters, our water filters, and everything else. But I think it's really nice to be able to start to take these things into consideration. So I'm impressed. I really am. I had no idea that you had this background. So now we have the whole green building background with the health coaching, integrative health practitioner background. And so again, really appreciate you coming on the show here today. Where can people connect with you? I know they obviously can connect with you over at Equal Life, but social media, do you post there as well?
Yeah, I do. I post on social media. Jessica Green Wellness is where I post on Instagram and on Facebook. And I definitely drop information around non-toxic living in that social media account. So definitely check that out.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure we will be interested in hearing more. So thank you so much. Appreciate you being on the show. And I'm sure we'll have a round 2 in the future as well. Thanks so much again. Take care, everyone. And we'll talk with you soon.
Thank you.